Hey, Andrea, who are you? What are you doing in the Here's How podcast feed?
Hi, William. Andrea Splendore is my name. I'm originally from Italy, but I've been living in Ireland for nearly 30 years. And I created a podcast back about 2 years ago at this stage called Social Fabric. And the idea of Social Fabric came from a bit of a fear about social media and the way it was destroying the fabric of our society. So that ends the name. And the podcast is a simple conversation with people that contribute to the community and about the fabric of our society and how we all contribute a part of it. So, for example, I've interviewed anybody from authors, musicians, but also people from general public that do extraordinary things like first responders or simple conversation with artists and why they do what they do. So I'm a great believer that everybody has something to contribute to our society. And if we were all to be exactly the same, we wouldn't be where we are now.
That sounds very interesting, Andrew. But rather than talking about it, let's let the listeners of Here's How have a free showcase episode of Social Fabric. Here it comes.
Sometimes when I start a song, I actually don't really know what it's about. And I used to feel like a real cheat for that until I read a couple of other writers that are the same, and novelists as well, that start a book and don't know where it's going to go.
This is Social Fabric, conversations with people about their passion and their contribution to the community. For more information, go to socialfabric.ie.
I went to the preacher, I asked him to tell me what was the difference between heaven and hell. Said one was above, one was below the ground. Who's gonna follow me down?
Basically, the whole idea is just to get to talk to as many people as possible. That's what I'm doing, from whether musicians, actors, director. I have a director coming on, Frank Berry.
Oh yeah, he did Michael Inside.
Beautiful movie.
It's fantastic.
It's a great movie. So he's coming on
Amazing
next.
film,
In a couple of weeks' time, he's coming to see me. But also regular people, that anybody, because the idea is to get my kids, your kids, to broaden their mind, and just maybe the guy next door is not necessarily an old fart. Maybe he's a nice guy. Maybe he's somebody that you can learn something from. So it's really, that's all it is basically. So anyway, I'm here with Steve Wall. So Steve, thanks a million.
Delighted to, Andrea.
Thanks a lot. I was listening to the podcast you did with Jarlath O'Regan. That was very interesting, very good.
That man, you know, makes you sort of so relaxed, then you say a lot more than you initially intended to say.
But there was some great stories. I didn't download the full version, but some great stories. But anyway, the thing I was interested in asking you a little bit about the biography. I know you lived between Dublin and
County Clare.
County Clare, but you mentioned your mum from the Liberties. Did you grow up in the Liberties yourself? Did you spend any time there?
No, my mother and father met in London in the late 50s, and like an awful lot of Irish people around that time, there was huge immigration from here, and so they met in London. I'm not sure where they met. It could have been in an Irish dance hall, you know, in Cricklewood or Kilburn or somewhere like that. I'm not sure where they met, but 4 of us were born in London. So I was born in 48 St. Paul's Avenue, Willesden Green, and then came Joe, and then came my sister Anna, and then Joe and my sister Helen. So there was 4 of us born, bang, 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 one after another. And then when I was, I think, 4.5 years old, I'm the eldest, we moved back to Ireland and we settled in Dublin. And so we lived in my mother's parents at this point they moved out of the Liberties because they were in Golden Lane, and a lot of stuff was being redeveloped and buildings getting demolished and everything. And so I don't know what it was at the time, where they encouraged to move or were people bought out or what, but they moved out to Harold's Cross.
The reason I was asking you, because the Liberties is still It's my favorite place in Dublin. It still is. I just love the liberties.
You get a real sense of
the
real
community.
old Dublin, and I get that as well on parts of the north side.
Yeah.
You know, because they haven't been over gentrified, and you know, the curse of globalization and homogenization of cities hasn't quite hit those places yet, and I hope it doesn't. I mean, the day that we see a H&M or a Zara or something like that on Mead Street will be a very sad day indeed.
That'll be the day we both need to move away from
Yeah.
this place. But so you grew up in Arrows Cross, and you're pretty much back in that area now. Thereabouts, you know. You're still
I'm actually
you're in Arrows Cross
in the same house.
Oh, you're in the same house. Oh, fabulous.
I had such a fantastic time in that house. I would have been only about 4.5, 5 years old, and we lived with my grandparents for, God, I can't remember how long. It was probably like a year or something like that. But we always lived nearby, and we spent a lot of time with them. But I just had such happy memories of that house. After my grandmother died and my uncle Christy, the house went on the market, and I bought it.
Oh, brilliant! So you're back there.
So I had been living in Galway up to that, and I had a house in Galway in the Claddagh. And I sold that, and I didn't look at another house in Dublin. I just knew I wanted that house, and it was a strange thing. It was an awful lot of it had to do with the memories of being in the house, and there was just a good atmosphere in the house. It was funny. There was a lot of laughter, a lot of music, and both my grandparents and my aunts and all, they were just great people, really entertaining. Loved their movies and music and literature and all of that, and never short of things to talk about. So looking back on it, I was just so happy there, and I just thought, well, you know, I want to live there. So,
and obviously it's changed an awful lot. But as it changed, like, is the community there the same as it was when you were there? I mean, obviously, you know, we're talking a good few years now.
Yeah, it's changed, and there you know, but I mean, there's been a lot of change for the better as well. You know, there's been some new businesses have opened up on the main Harold's Cross Road there. You know, there's a great restaurant called Craft. It's a really wonderful restaurant, and there's a little antique shop, you know, knickknacks and stuff, and there's a woman who makes kind of Indian style clothes and all this, and businesses kind of come and go a bit. But yeah, it's good to see some things thriving, and but then there's been some sad aspects as well. Like there was the classic cinema, where as a kid I would have gone to see things like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and Bruce Lee's Fists of Fury and things like that. And during those crazy Celtic Tiger years, somebody bought it and thought, you know, well, we're going to have a German supermarket chain on this site. And they demolished the cinema, and over a weekend, I think probably it happened maybe 6 or 7 years ago, maybe more. And the cinema was just razed to the ground, and there's just a kind of, you know, quarter acre of rubble. And it's exactly the same now. And it's just every time I pass it and I look in there, I thought, that is the most depressing sight. It's just this vacant lot where there was just so many memories emanated from that building. And I kind of thought, I remember years back actually, a friend of mine in Harold's Cross, she had this idea, because there's a lot of old people in the area. And the cinema was empty at this point, and she had this idea of, she said, wouldn't it be great to turn that into a kind of a place where during the day, the older people can come and they show movies of, you know, older movies, maybe from the 50s, 60s, whatever, yeah. And or even the 40s, depending on how old they are. And then you have a cafe there so that, you know, all those people that live in the area, there's somewhere for them to go and have a cup of tea and a bun and a chat, see a movie, you know, all of that. Now, I suppose that's kind of wishful thinking, because everything now, you know, maybe an idea like that wouldn't have been financially lucrative enough. But it's just, you really feel like that place was it was the heart of Harold's Cross for a while, that cinema.
But that's the biggest problem at the moment, that we're losing the heart of a lot of things. You know, we're losing the community centres. You know, we have to rebuild the community centre. It was already there, but we knock it down, then we build.
Yeah,
it's bespoke community centre is not what it's like.
Yeah,
it is. It's an issue. It is an issue.
Well, with this kind of the housing crisis at the moment, some of the sort of the so-called cures for it, you know, I think are a bit bizarre. You know, like, and they haven't addressed certain things. You know, there's certain things, like I think Airbnb is a big issue in Dublin. There are thousands of short-term lets, and people are making a lot of money out of Airbnb. If it really is a crisis, I don't see why they don't act on those things like that straight away. Like, I know in Amsterdam, I think you can only rent a property for 60 nights a year or something.
That's
like
right,
that.
and they've done similar in New York.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, why are we so slow to address things like that here? You know, and the amount of properties that are held back for Airbnb usage is staggering. And now they're talking about also rushing through planning permission and rezoning for industrial estates, old industrial estates around Dublin. Now, we have our studio in an old industrial estate in Harold's Cross called Greenmount. And there's loads of little businesses there. The place is really thriving. There's everything from gyms to yoga to martial arts to printers. The Bretzel Bakery is down there. There's like a photographer's studio. There's Bikram yoga, all this kind of stuff. It's a small little old industrial estate that dates back to the turn of the century. I think it was a linen works. There's an old mill underneath. The Poddle River runs underneath it. So if a place like that is rezoned for apartment use, then what? You expect everybody that's actually working in there, lives in the neighbourhood and all that, to just get out, get in their car and head out on the M50. You know, like, you need to have things like that in cities as well, workplaces.
I
It
agree.
can't be just apartment living and chains of Costa and Insomnia shops and spars and centres everywhere. You know what I mean? You're just going to look like every other city in Europe, and that's already starting to happen. But, you know, you can't have that. They need to go high-rise in places, and maybe there are industrial estates where they're just lying idle. But a place like in Greenmount and Harold's Cross, the place is thriving. Like, it's packed.
Anyway, just before I ask you a couple of things, as I always ask everybody to give me a few songs, and you threw a few at me. One of them, the first one was Howling Wolf, Smokestacks Lightning.
Smokestack Lightning, yeah.
And any particular reason why you picked that?
Just I'm a huge fan of Howlin' Wolf, and he's just, I don't know, I think Howlin' Wolf, without Howlin' Wolf there wouldn't be a Rolling Stones, there wouldn't be a Van Morrison, there wouldn't be a Captain Beefheart, even Tom Waits. Howlin' Wolf, when you start to listen to his music, is so influential on all of those artists. He really changed the face of the style of music that, funnily enough, started to emanate first out of the UK. And you can hear it in his vocals, and you can hear, if you listen to early Van Morrison and when he recorded with them, you can really hear the Howlin' Wolf influence. And just an amazing band as well. There's a guitar player called Hubert Sumlin, who had a very distinct style, and he also played every now and then with Muddy Waters, but this was a bone of contention with Howlin' Wolf. Apparently they were always fighting over this.
Over the guitar.
Yeah, and I think when Hubert Sumlin joined Howlin' Wolf's band, the first thing that the Wolf did was he took the plectrum off him, and he just said, you can't play with that, you've got to play with your fingers. So, you know, like Smokestack Lightning, when you hear that guitar riff, dun, 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 you know, it's done with the fingers. And his stuff, the Howlin' Wolf stuff as well, it's slow. It's a slow groove. It's not real up-tempo. So the slow groove and the swing of it, it really gives the songs this power. And his voice, his huge voice. And he's a big man, big man.
Oh, smokestack lightning, shining just like gold. Oh, don't you hear me cry? Woo, woo, woo. Oh, tell me, baby, what's don't matter, yeah. Oh, don't you hear me cry? Woo, woo, woo.
I want to ask you something just kind of related to what we were talking about Harris Cross and the way it could go the wrong way if they redevelop Greenmount and so on. You're a father of a teenage daughter now. What would you like to see for your daughter growing up in Arrowscross if she stays there? What would you like to see happening? Because I'm worried about my kids and the way everything is globalized, everything is the same. And some of us are lucky to know they're living in a particular area where we still have the village feel and so on. But what we just discussed about. So what would you like to see for your daughter growing up there? What would you like to see changing?
Well, first of all, I mean, she's going to school just down in Ranelagh. It's near enough, and actually, I would be scared of her cycling to school.
Yeah,
I think that's wrong.
I know.
I think you should be able to get on. I cycle all the time, and it's dangerous. It's bloody dangerous cycling around Dublin. I had my helmet on. Well,
you had an accident a few years ago.
I did, yeah. I came off a bike, and I've had a few accidents, motorcycle, but the bicycle one was the most annoying one. But like I wear a helmet now, and but I would be worried about her cycling because like there's no cycle lane in this particular route. Say going down to Rathmines and over there, and I know what it's like at that hour of the morning because I'm sometimes out on the bike at the same time, and it's crazy. And the cyclists are
Just as
pretty
dangerous,
crazy
yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
There's these fellas and they're charging down from wherever, Rathfarnham or the Dublin Mountains or something, and they've picked up speed. They have their suit and the backpack on their back, and they're barreling down, and they're taking no prisoners. And that's one thing I would like to see change. I think it should be safe for whoever, especially kids, to get on their bike in such a relatively small city and a flat city. It should be a bike-friendly city. And I mean, it doesn't even rain that often in Dublin. People think that Ireland is a wet country. I mean, the rain in the west is a different story altogether. It's only, a few hours away. But in Dublin, it's actually relatively dry. I bought wet gear and I hardly ever wear it for on the bike. But I think that's one thing I'd love to see change. You should be able to get on your bike and you should be able to cycle safely down the road to the next neighbourhood or two, whatever. And also, I think it's good that kids have a sense of pride in where they're from, their neighbourhood, and that they, when things happen, like, I always keep an eye on, I sign up to the local newsletter, So when there's, say, planning permission coming up for something, I think you have to look at these things and just don't accept everything that's foisted on you. I think that's one thing about the current climate as well. People tend to say, oh, there goes that old place there, and there's another Lidl going into it or whatever. People sort of accept that there's nothing they can do about that if it's actually not going to benefit the community. I'm not just saying Lidl. It could be anything. It could be, So I think that's one thing that I would, and I do teach my daughter not to accept things just because you're told this is what's happened. Question everything. And grow up questioning everything. And you don't have to go along with things just because you think that you're powerless to say no.
Again, I was listening to the conversation with Jarlath about the way you were not necessarily pushed, but you ended up in school and college, which didn't really fit you. Didn't suit you. You weren't made for whatever you did, mechanical engineer. It wasn't your gig. And your creativity was a bit kind of dampened for a few years until you actually figured out it was about time to come out and get the guitar or whatever it was. Acting. With your daughter now, how do you see how are you gonna make sure that she doesn't go the wrong way? How are you gonna deal with that? Because
I think it's different now in a way that I think the schools are better. Well, when I went to school and when we moved to County Clare, myself and Joe went into the Christian Brothers there. It was a small school. Now, career guidance was a joke, really. It was like a 5-minute session with the head brother who basically said to you, he said, what are you interested in? And I think I said, art, brother. And he more or less just laughed me out, and he just said, there's no money in that. It's not you won't get a job in art, basically. So that was sort of the extent of it. And then we were all packed off, and on minibuses every couple of weeks we'd go off. They'd bring us off to do an exam for the Bank of Ireland, and then AIB, and then the ESB, and then the Post and Telegraphs and stuff. You'd be just carted off to do these exams, ridiculous, whether you wanted to or not. But now, I think the schools are a bit more, a little bit clued in. I think parents are a little bit more clued in as well, generally. And there's, you would look out for signs of, if your kid, if they do have, talents in a certain area, you'd encourage it. And also not kind of push them. Just because I'm a musician, I wouldn't push my daughter into being a musician as well.
No,
but I would,
at all.
I wouldn't sort of insist on it. But I would sort of like kind of have everything there if she wanted to try it out. You know what I mean? And now she does do piano lessons. And that can, getting her to practice can be a bit of a battle.
But she might not even be interested. She might not be even creative. She might want to work
exactly.
in the bank.
Yeah, she might, she might become an accountant or something like that, or whatever. And I'm absolutely fine.
The
If she
reason
doesn't,
I'm asking you is that I find that, like, my kid's a little bit older than yours, and it's just the pressure in the schools, and not necessarily in their school, but this idea of points, and I don't even understand it. The point system, and it really is. It's a vertical teaching. That it doesn't allow for much.
I haven't really gotten to that yet.
Okay.
No, but I know that's going to start kicking in because the year after this year, my daughter will be in the junior cert. So this is our first time, sort of. And I haven't, all those articles in the paper about points and all that, I just don't read them because I know it's going to become a thing soon. Yeah. So I've kind of put off delving into all of that.
Well, you can give me a call. I'll explain it all to you in a couple of years.
You know what? And I don't want it to become about that. I mean, I wasn't good at school, and I'm doing okay. I'm getting by, and I think it's just. I think get the priorities right to try and be content in your life as well. I mean, I still have a long way to go because I'm not saying that I'm, like this big smiling Buddha there that everything's sorted out. It's not. I have the usual angst and panic attacks, over not knowing where the next check is going to come from. But sometimes what calms me down is just to say, look, you've gotten this far. Yeah. You haven't starved. And, and I'm kind of mostly proud of the work that I've been able to do. And, even though I would have very slow output, like I don't put out an awful lot of music or anything. Sure. And now I've sort of branched off, experimenting, dabbling in acting, quite late in my career. But I'm enjoying it. And I think that's the main thing, Don't be a layabout. Try things and just always, have things to do.
Absolutely. Just another quick song, The Damned, New Rose.
New Rose. I still get that sort of hairs on my arms stand up every time I hear the intro to that.
Right.
It's probably one of the first punk rock recordings, and just the energy in it. It brings me back to a time, and I suppose that would be my era, would be punk rock, would be, I think everyone has an era in music, or maybe a few tracks that are sort of your defining moment. They kind of define a lot of things about you, about the sort of things you like in music, and not just music, everything. But for me, that era in punk rock, some of it was bad, but some of it was great. And I think that today's music environment could really do with an injection of that attitude. Not so much the music. I mean, the music possibly, but there was an attitude from artists around that time of the punk era, and some artists as well. They weren't necessarily punk, but they just came in under that umbrella, really, like Elvis Costello and all that, and Wilco Johnson and Dr. Feelgood and all that. They weren't necessarily punk, but it was an attitude of not accepting the status quo, and of being obstinate, a bit arrogant, and also kicking against the pricks. A bit of that. I'm not going to just accept what I'm told and accept authority. And it was actually a really healthy atmosphere because, you had all that, anti-Thatcherite stuff going on at the time, and you had great artists coming out like Joe Strummer, And even Bob Geldof came out of that scene.
Yeah.
And I don't know, in the current climate of there's so many just wussy bands out there, musically and every way, there's absolutely nothing lyrically that they're saying that is gonna help the world in any way. They're moaning, but I'm gonna remove your tattoo or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, it's all of this just self-centered, crass, sickly. I just can't listen to it. And I just think, what would, a bit of Joe Strummer now, to take them aside, someone like Joe Strummer or whatever, and to sort of like give them a bit of spunk, and maybe then, we could, if you have enough people like that, you wouldn't have this housing crisis. There would have been protests over it. They protested about water, but nobody really protested about the housing crisis. I went on the protest there, I think it was a few months back, and it was a decent turnout, but God, it was hard to get people to come out, because anybody that's sitting in a house isn't going to go out and march.
True, yeah.
True. So that's for me, New Rose by the Damned. That's a long answer now to your question,
okay, yeah.
Andre. But New Rose by the Damned brings me back to that intrinsic feeling of just kicking against the pricks, I suppose, and it's just the vibe of it. It still gets me to this day.
Inside of me, it's kind of strange, like a stormy sea. I don't know why. I guess these things have gotta be. I've got a new rose, I've got it good. Yes, I knew that I always would. I can't stop to mess around. I got a brand new rose in town. See the sun, it shines. Don't get too close or it'll burn your eyes. Don't you run away that way.
What's your relationship with social media?
Probably reluctant, I suppose, in a lot of ways. I've gotten myself in trouble on social media. I haven't spoken about this publicly before, but I recently got sued for just a mistake. I posted, it was to do with a festival we played, where we didn't get paid. We didn't get paid the balance of our fee. And I put a link to the website for this festival was still live, and I put a link to their website, to the About page, on which there was a photograph of the organisers. It turned out that the photograph was from the committee the year before we did the festival. So there was somebody in that photograph who wasn't on the committee the year we did it. And he basically sued me for defamation. So it was totally, I didn't name people in it. I just said we didn't get paid. And my post was basically, it was a sort of a post to advise other musicians to, if you feel that there's a chance that you mightn't get paid, well, if you do the show, you haven't a leg to stand on afterwards. I mean, we had it in our contract, as we do, that we have the right to ask for full payment before we play. And in this case, that was the contract that was signed for this particular festival. And but they actually lied to us. They told us that they didn't have funds there, and they hadn't time to get a bank draft on the Friday beforehand. And they said they'd do an electronic transfer. We'd have it on the Monday or Tuesday. And it never arrived, and then a year later we got a letter from their receiver or something saying
They're from Boston.
They're gone, and you can forget about getting anything. So it was around then when I put this post, and it was like a warning to musicians, just, you have a right to actually, if you put it in your contract, not to perform. If you feel that there's a risk the money won't come through. And so I think my post embarrassed these people, and I think so one of them decided he'd he'd used this opportunity to put me in my place. And so that taught me a lesson of the dangers of social media. I already knew it, and that's why I was actually quite careful in the wording of this post, that I wasn't pointing the finger at any individual, but that's what got me the link to that photograph.
Right.
And you would think by, because, I had a very good solicitor, and he just said, look, they're gone. So this individual can't take a case against them, so it's you. And the thing is, it'll just come down to the brass tacks. The picture was on your page. So you have to be careful with it. My relationship with social media is you have to use it. We have to use it for the band. Sure. I get frustrated at it because I don't like spending too long on it. It kind of leaves me feeling vacuous. It's not like going and doing something tangible, like a tangible day's work. You have something to show for it. But we use it for, to promote gigs, to remind people of gigs. It's just tied into everything to do with the music business now. And also you can see it in the acting and theatre worlds and everything. You see actors now that a lot of them have Instagram pages and all this, and they're updating. I don't like a lot of it. I find some of that very narcissistic. I actually hate it. And I think people, I actually block people that post too many selfies of themselves, because I just can't. I can't understand, when did that become cool to take selfies of yourself every day, or even more, more times a day, and post them for everyone to see. It's like, who wants to do that? Maybe if you're one of these people, one of these brainless twats who just, calls themselves, what do they call them now? Digital influencers.
Digital influencers, that's the word,
but that I try to avoid taking, and I never do actually, pictures of pints of Guinness and posting them on social media. That's kind of been done before. So I always try to, usually...
But I noticed, which is interesting, they're obviously very... I noticed some of the posts you put up, which are very relevant to your business, because for example, there was one particular report that it was 43 billion generated by the music business, but only 5 billion went to the artists.
Yeah.
So that's obviously very relevant.
Yeah.
Because there you are, we've been making music for 30 odd years more.
Yeah.
And you have to make a living out of it, but you're getting less than 10%, or 10%. You artists getting 10% of what's put out there.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a labour of love. It's a lot of work.
It's unbelievable at the moment how the way the industry has gone. I actually do think that there's some kind of collusion going on behind the scenes, because, in a way, a lot of artists thought, the internet now, it's opened up this freedom. We don't need a record label. We can just put out our own music, go direct to the fan and sell it. Okay, in lots of ways you can. But you're a needle in a haystack. And it's gone even harder since CD sales have declined so much. Now, CD sales have declined for various reasons. They've stopped putting CD drives in laptops.
That's right.
They're stopping putting them into cars. Newer cars now won't have them. It'll be just Bluetooth and wireless connectivity to the internet. So it's kind of we still manufacture CDs because we're selling them at gigs, and we sell some mail order. We're doing vinyl now again for the same reason. But it's like the industry, when the hardware is being taken away, what can you do? So I often wonder what's going on behind the scenes there. How about all these companies like, Akai, Sony, Marantz, all these companies that made CD players? What are they doing now? Why is this just stopped? I mean, there was no need for it. CDs were fine. I hated the plastic jewel cases, but I loved the digipacks. That's why we always put our albums out with the digipack, the nice cardboard case and all that. You put them on your shelf so that anyone that visits your house can go through them, and, they can see your music there. Your kids can see it. To me, that's a really important thing. From about the age of 4, I've been pulling up the chair to the stereo system and letting my daughter, pick out a CD and put it in the drawer and whatever. And I mean, at that age, they just go by the cover. I like the cover of that one. But what are your kids, going to do in the future to see what kind of music daddy liked? Do they need to get your Spotify login details and your password or whatever? It's just gone.
My daughter said to me the other day, she said, it's sad you guys listen to the Stones, the Beatles, and all the cool stuff that I'm listening to now, But when I'll have my daughter or my son, and he'll ask me, "What were you listening to?" Post Malone, you know.
Yeah.
She says, "Well, it's not cool. I like to listen to cool bands." I said, "Well, they're still out there, so just go and find it."
You know what? I don't mind Post Malone so much.
But
I think
that's what she said.
You know, he's kind of like, I think he's kind of entertaining. He's funny. I watched a thing on YouTube. It was just sort of like a day hanging out with Post Malone. I liked his kind of irreverence. You know, I think it'd be better if he drank a nicer beer than Bud Light, but they're obviously giving to him free. I mean, the guy is just swelling up, you know, because he's just drinking sugar and water all day long. But, you know, he's got a bit of that sort of punk rock ethos to him that I like. He's going around and he's swigging beer all day. Yeah. His teeth aren't perfect, and he's puffing on cigarettes, whatever, and he's about 24 or something. You know, it's like, that's kind of like, do you know what I mean? You look at any videos like, you know, Joy Division or something, you know, The Fall, all those bands that I grew up with, and you see them, they're drinking a beer and smoking a fag and all that kind of stuff. You know, no, they're not. No. It's not all of this clean cut sort of stuff.
And another one you have, which they weren't perfect, but they were fantastic. Led Zeppelin, Heartbreaker.
Yeah, the reason is Led Heartbreaker. There's a guitar solo in that is just one of the most amazing guitar solos. And when I was a kid, I used to actually mime with it would be either a tennis racket or a hurley, and I would actually put that song on and just mime the whole thing in front of a mirror.
A couple of more questions about music, because when I first moved to Ireland, which is maybe 28 years ago now.
Wow. Where did you come from, Andre? From Rome.
From Rome, yeah.
Wow.
So I came here, and the Stunning were the biggest band at the time. Yeah, I remember arriving. I said, "Well, that's a great band." I didn't know about you guys because you weren't famous in Italy at the time, early 90s. But so yeah, that was.
We're still not famous in Italy.
No, still not famous in Italy, but. The music scene then in Dublin was brilliant. Like, I came to see you guys a few times. I used to go out pretty much every second night. Whelan's, there was all sorts of different gigs. McGonagall's. It was just great fun.
Yeah,
there was bands every night, and good, bad, and different. There was always something. That's changed dramatically, hasn't it? Like, what's the music scene now in Dublin for live music or?
Well, it's I think. Compared to a lot of other countries, I think the music scene in Ireland is really healthy.
It's still good, yeah.
I think there's amazing music coming out, and every year there's like a new artist, whatever, that just you is just really impressive, Yeah. And I think the country definitely bats above its weight in terms of its musical output. I think. It's like kind of touching on what I was saying there about just how it's all gone online with Spotify, how all that has changed. I think that has affected artists as well. The big problem for Irish artists is breaking out of Ireland. That's the biggest obstacle. Yeah. The internet, I suppose, the internet doesn't solve that. No. Even though there's no boundaries with the internet. The fact that we're an island in the middle of the Atlantic is still a challenge to artists. You can't. I'd say, like, if you're an artist, say in America, I actually remember reading the thing about the Dave Matthews Band. Dave Matthews Band pretty much like started out like a bar band, but they just, you have a van parked outside your house on your street, and you get into it, with the rest of the lads, and you live in America, you can just You can drive, play across to the West Coast, and by the time you get to the West Coast, they've forgotten who you are on the East Coast, and then you go back there, and you know, like Elvis Presley never played outside of America, well, except a gig in Hawaii, but a lot of those artists, they just play in America. It's so vast, and they can have a major career for themselves. But in Ireland, whatever about going to America, it's really difficult now for artists to do that. Even going to the UK, like the costs, unless it would, when there's no record label support, that system is gone. It's really difficult. You need to do it on the cheap. That's why a lot of artists will do it sort of like maybe acoustic, or a solo artist would definitely, they'll do it on their own first. If you're in a 4-piece rock band, that's even harder, because you kind of need everybody.
Yeah.
So it's really expensive, and a lot of artists basically they just run out of steam because they run out of money, and and that's exactly what happened. The Stunning were funding trips to the States in the hope that we might get a deal. We did tours in the UK, supporting Bob Dylan. We did a UK tour with the B-52s. We went over and we did our own shows. And we just, everything that we made in Ireland was pumped into these gigs. But, you've got a van on the road, a driver, maybe, someone helping you with backline stuff and all that. And then everyone has to get fed, and everyone needs somewhere to stay. You have to, pay for cheap hotels every night. And any night you're there and you're not doing a gig, it's costing you money. Most people tend to go out to gigs, at the weekend.
Yeah. So
but
you have 3 or 4 days in between.
You've those days you've got to fill, and, so that's kind of changed. I think that's also changed the type of artists. Like, people kind of forget how economic reasons kind of affect the type of music that's being made as well. Like, an awful lot of artists wouldn't think of forming like a 4 or 5 piece band because it's just too difficult to tour with.
So they do the
So they do the sort of the
DJing and auto-tuning and
whatever, or they just do something that's manageable and acoustic and small,
And again, back then, I always remember coming over, and I never made it. I could never get tickets for the Trip to Tip at the time, and you're doing one now next month, isn't it?
Yeah, two actually.
Two nights.
September 21, 22.
That's right, yeah. But festivals now seem to have taken over a lot of the live. There's festival everywhere.
Yeah.
The Electric Picnic being probably the main one, but what's your view on those?
We've spent the whole summer doing festivals, and we're not doing Electric Picnic. We're not doing any. Well, what are the other big ones? We did Groove Festival actually down in Kilruddery, and that was fantastic.
It's a great festival.
Really lovely. And we did Fantastival. We did. We were down last weekend in Timoleague in West Cork. We'll be doing Mungret in Limerick this weekend. So we've done nearly every weekend. We've done a festival around the country, and they've been terrific. And one thing that's kind of nice about them is that the ages are really mixed. So you're getting to play to a younger crowd that wouldn't normally go out and buy a ticket to see the Stunning, but they've been, because they're there and they're seeing other things, they've been really enjoying it.
Would you get back, like if you were to start tomorrow, would you start the music again? Would you get back into music?
I probably would. I just love music, not just listening to it. I love the challenge, that elusive challenge of trying to write a really good song. And for me, it's something that sort of, I'm not a prolific writer. I don't play the guitar every day. I probably should pick it up because I know nothing will happen unless I do. I do tend to get caught up in things with just normal life, having a family, and now I've kind of I've sort of distracted myself with the kind of acting thing a bit as well, but I'm really enjoying that. But I know it's very hard to do. It's very hard to do both and to focus and to do both things well. But I probably would still pursue music. I think I'd do it probably in a different way. Like I was saying, it's it being based in Ireland. Like, it's hard to go and tour unless you've got a big record company behind you as a band. It's just the way the industry is. It doesn't really suit bands unless you're. I mean, look at all the big bands. They've all come from the old kind of system where a band gets signed to a big record deal and they get a publishing deal and then they get a booking agent and you know, they want to go and try and break America, whatever, so they get tagged on as a support. You know, it could be a 2-month tour to a major artist over there, and they might even have to, the record label might even have to buy them onto the tour. You know, that takes a lot of investment, and if you're an independent artist, you just can't do that. So you might stand some hope if you're a solo artist or something. So I think that's why you see a lot more kind of solo artists and small outfits these days. It's just more manageable. You can get out, and because the thing is, the mad thing is, in order to be like successful in Ireland, it almost works better if you've been anointed abroad.
Else, yeah.
You know, and not that being successful in Ireland is the whole purpose of it anyway, but to sort of, you know, like if you get any kind of success even or notice even in the UK, then you start to get booked for festivals in Europe and all of that. It's still, I mean, the UK and America are really still the centre of the international music business.
Okay, Planksty, your Rambly Boys of Pleasure.
That's
I didn't know that song. I listened to it today. It's a lovely song.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Yeah,
Gorgeous song, yeah.
I sing that. That's my party piece.
Okay.
I'm still learning to sing it, because you can never really sing it as good as Andy Irvine sings it on that recording. That's from a Planksty album from around, I think, 1979 or something. Right. And it's just one of those songs. It's an old air. I don't know what I think the author is anonymous, and maybe it's like one of those old traditional Irish songs that everybody, as it was passed along from person to person, everyone added their own verse or changed a lyric here and there. But it's just probably one of the most perfect recordings and arrangements of a song I've ever heard. You know, you've just got some class musicians at the top of their game, and Andy Irvine's voice is just so kind of plaintive and soft and vulnerable or something like that. It's just class. I try to sing it sometimes, but I never match that.
You rambling boys of pleasure, give ear unto these lines I write. I own I am a rover, in rambling I take great delight. I cast my mind on a handsome girl, and oftentimes she does me slight. My mind is never easy.
Brewing Up the Storm, which is supposed to be probably your most famous song.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
It's actually one of my. If I ever do my 7 songs, it's up there with my 7 songs.
Oh, thank you.
I love it. I love
I'm
the
honoured.
song. No, I love it. It is my favourite song, and as I said to you a while back, I actually managed to murder one of the gigs we did. That was great. It went down well.
It's easy anyway.
It's easy. It's
easy.
But what's it about? What's it all about?
Brewing Up a Storm is about a friend of mine who had, how would you call it, a manic episode.
Okay.
It's about manic depression, and so at the time when it happened, it was the first time, and he had a manic episode, and he just went pretty crazy. He was quite ill for maybe a good while after that, maybe a year or so, and he's absolutely perfect now. But it was about sort of like that whole when someone goes crazy like that, it's a manic energy, and that would be followed then by a plunge into depression. But I didn't get to see the plunge into depression because he went into hospital, and then they managed it with, you know, he was treated successfully, medication and stuff like that, and he's absolutely fine now. He's a great friend. I love him to bits. But the time when this manic thing kicked in, it was really scary, and because we didn't know what was happening, and like that whole thing about fire in your eyes, in your head, fire in your touch. Like he was actually like, you know, when he'd grab your hand, like he was just so, his nails would dig in, and that's what it's about. So people kind of think it's about going mad on a night out, but it's actually about it's actually about a mental
I never
illness.
knew, and I never asked you before, but it's as I say, it's a great song. That makes a lot more sense now when I listen
and
to
the
it
whole
again.
the whole first line, "Honey, if the truth hurts, don't look, it might go away," is kind of about the how people are almost afraid to talk about it. You know, like if you have any other kind of illness, you could talk about it. You know, you've got Crohn's disease, or you've got
A bad back. Or,
you know, a bad back, or you've got sort of you're HIV positive. Well, people, you know, don't tend to talk about it a lot, but you're treated it successfully or whatever. You know, people talk about those, but mental illness is one that people never, I don't think they know how to talk about it, and they're that's why they're so reticent, because it's, you don't know how to people will skirt around the topic and all of that, and I think it's just because they don't have the language to talk about it. And like I wrote that song in 1988, I think it was.
yeah. So I mean, there's been a lot of amazing work being done by some great organizations on the mental health and to talk about, and it's getting better. But it's still, I agree, there's still a taboo about, you know, because then there's all this variety of mental health, but it's manic depression. You know, there's too many aspects of it, and I suppose it's for somebody that unfortunately finds himself or herself in the situation, it's hard to know, am I really mentally unwell or what's going on? So
Yeah.
well, that's so. Just to stay on the topic of songwriting, because I had another musician on, Eamon O'Connor from Lucky Bones, a lovely man, and he's decided his life is music, and you know he's hitting his late 30s now, but he said no, I'm going to carry on, and he's on his third album, and it's great. And I asked him how he finds inspiration for songs. How do you find, like you say, you're not a very prolific writer, but is it something like you're walking around, you get inspired by something, you write it down and return to it? Or?
Yeah, I think I need to get my act together more. I've sort of, I haven't written anything now in a couple of years, and I allow myself to get distracted too easily. Also, things like, you know, like you were saying, you know, talking about social media there, things like that actually, and even laptops. You know, you turn on, everything is done now on a computer. You know, so I go on to answer some emails or whatever, and before I know it, by the time I've say updated social media pages or done any of that kind of stuff, 3 hours could be gone. And then it's like, oh God, I've got to go and collect my kid from school or whatever like that. So I've kind of found that modern life and its accoutrements have definitely gnawed away at that sort of that time, which is a sort of a daydreaming time that ideas and songs come from. That I remember actually talking to Tommy Tiernan about this a few years back, and it was like, if you were to say to somebody that I need time to daydream, they'd kind of think you were, you know, who the hell do you think you are? Like, I wish we all had time to daydream, but
they call it mindfulness.
It's kind of,
that's what.
It's sort of now. It's sort of like for me, I know that anything I've ever come up with, a lyric or music and all that, has always happened when I remember I used to come up with ideas for songs like on trains. I was always traveling before I could drive. You know, I always seemed to be traveling across the country or sitting in a van. You know, trains are great because there's something about a train just looking out at the countryside passing by, and you know, and the rhythm of the tracks and all that, or even like a good bus journey. I always found in those situations, because you can't really do anything else, you're sort of trapped in this time capsule, and sometimes ideas would come up. I'd always have a dictaphone on me. Now it's like your smartphone, and you can record stuff into it. But I find even I'm not in those situations enough where I'm just daydreaming. And for me, like, I don't sort of like flick through the paper sometimes and see something and say, I'm going to write a song about that. That doesn't tend to happen. Okay. It tends to be sometimes like a lyric, or it might be a phrase that I've come across in a book I'm reading or something.
Okay.
And sometimes when I start a song, I actually don't really know what it's about. And I used to feel like a real cheat for that until I read a couple of other writers that are the same, and novelists as well, that start a book and don't know where it's going to go. Sometimes I'd have a vague idea of what I want to write about, but I prefer when the song is a little bit vague as well, and people can kind of fill in the gaps, that you kind of suggest things. Like the last song I wrote, I haven't recorded it yet, is a song called Rain on the Wind. And I had gone to the Tyrone Guthrie Centre. It's a artist retreat up in County Monaghan. And I booked myself in there this couple of years ago for, I think, 10 days, a week or 10 days. And I was probably there 3 days and nothing was happening, just no ideas or anything. But I kind of know now from experience that the longer you've been away from writing anything or making anything creative, the longer it's like it you've got to go through this period, then a longer period of peeling away the layers. I kind of think it's like an onion in a way, you know, the older the onion is, that the more kind of dead layers you're going to get around the outside. So it took me about 3 days, I'd say, before I started to get anywhere. And it was one night, and the house there in the Tyrone Guthrie Centre, it's a really old house from, you know, probably the late 1800s or something. And I was just kind of daydreaming, thinking, I wonder what this place was like when it was an active working farm, a big house. With, you know, I think the landlord was very benevolent, Tyrone Guthrie himself, and he treated his tenant farmers very well, and when times were tough, I think he built a jam factory and all there. But I was just trying to imagine the place with all of these, a hive of activity, and the time of year I was there was around October, so there was it was coming up to Halloween, and there was, you know, a pumpkin with a candle outside and all that. And I just had this sort of, and it was just pure wistful kind of daydreaming of a ball, you know, a masked ball, and all the people coming, you know, all the people coming from the surrounding areas. And as this picture was unfolding of this, I started to write it down. Okay. And it was the first time I'd ever written anything that was actually set in another century, you know, like a period song, you know. I'd never done anything like that before. And I just kind of went with it, and it all centered around this, you know, all the people arriving, you know, pulling up in carriages and all this to this place, and the masked ball taking place. And then there's a little bit of an illicit love affair as well happening in the middle of all of this. And I was, you know, I haven't recorded it yet, but I think lyrically it's probably one of the best things I've ever written, because I never tried to write anything like that before. To paint it was almost like painting a scene in a movie, and I think that's kind of the way I approached it. But I hadn't approached the song like that before.
Have you put music to it already?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my last question on the music is, because you have a great following in Ireland, and I'm sure somewhere else, but definitely in Ireland, you know, you sold out all the dates the last couple of years or whatever. Yeah. Definitely last summer, and your album Twice Around the World did really well. Yeah, number one, yeah,
on the independent album charts.
Yeah, brilliant. So there is a, you know, your fans want to hear more stuff.
Yeah.
So basically, get it done.
Get it done. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So
I need to go to bed earlier, Andrea. Okay. And get up earlier.
Okay. Now, Nick Mulvey, Fever to the Form.
Fever to the Form. Yeah, I saw this guy. I'd never heard of him before, and I saw him a couple of years ago performing this song on Jools Holland, and he was just on his own playing a nylon string guitar, and just something about the song, the sort of, I don't know, it just I can't quite put my finger on it, but it just got me straight away, and I was like, that is a fantastic song. So I went out and I bought the guy's CD, you know, like a couple of days later, and he's really talented. And there's something about his singing, like it's kind of soulful. Like he reaches into a place that's just kind of, I don't know, just pure. It flows or something. You know, I don't even really know what the song's about, but
I listened to it. It's a lovely song.
It's beautiful.
I didn't know the guy existed.
yeah,
but
it's
good.
beautiful,
Yeah,
and the
definitely.
album's really nice. I read up a little bit about him, and I think he spent some time. He's a young guy, you know. I'd say he's like in his late 20s now or something. But I think he spent some time in Cuba, studying music there. And you can definitely hear that on some of the songs on the record. So I'd be curious now to see what he'll come out with next. I mean, maybe there's been another album since that one, and I've missed it. But this is beautiful.
So we're the musical madness. We live by one of the two. By one of the two. So go on, fill your heart up with gladness. Not a moment too soon. Not a moment too soon. We should be rational reasons. Choose a child to ignore. Of this I've never been sure. So I will follow the feeling and sing fever to the phone. All of my fever to the phone.
You mentioned a few times acting. Obviously, you did a few things. You did Moonboy, The Vikings, and you did some acting in theatre in the past. So acting was always something you enjoyed. But I'm really genuinely looking forward to see this Chet Baker. Chet Baker, I always liked jazz, but Chet Baker's always been my hero. It's just something about Chet Baker that I think it made it jazz accessible to everybody. And you played Chet Baker in this movie, My Foolish Heart, and that must have been some experience. Did it take long to learn to get into it? Tell me a bit about the journey.
Yeah, well, I my acting agent, Richard Cook, he runs a film festival for foreign films in Kilkenny every year. It's called Subtitle, and it's really just attended by European directors, casting agents, actors. They have screenings and all that, and it's a bit of an industry thing. It's a opportunity for Irish casting agents to meet foreign actors and vice versa. But he met a Dutch casting agent called Rebecca Van Oonen at this festival a couple of years back, and they were chatting, and he just said, what have you got next on the cards? And she said, we're trying to find Chet Baker. The Dutch are going to make a film about him because he died in Amsterdam in 1988. And so whenever my agent hears anything at all that has anything to do with music, he always thinks of me. That's how the Moonboy thing happened, because the character... Uncle Danny and Moonboy played guitar and busked. Right. That's how that happened. He just went, Steve Wall, right. Plays guitar. So he just kind of... So he called me and he said, what do you think of this? And I was just like, let me at it. I would love to have a go to audition for this. And so I did... I basically told them a fib. They were like, could you send a tape over? Because a lot of auditions now are taped. Self-tapes they're called. Somehow you get another actor in to read the lines to you, and you just film yourself in front of a blank background. And so I kind of told them a little fib. I told them I was away on holidays for the week, where I wasn't, because I knew I needed that time to just delve into the world of Chet Baker. So I spent that week just watching everything. I'd already seen the documentary Let's Get Lost by Bruce Weber. I'd already seen that, but I watched that again numerous times. I also downloaded excerpts from that onto my phone and walked around listening to his voice to try and get the timbre and his accent, very unusual speaking voice and accent. And so then I was singing, I was listening to his music all day and singing songs, and it was difficult for me because in the early years, Chet's voice was much higher than mine. I mean, when I heard Chet Baker sing for the first time, I actually thought it was a woman. I thought it was a female singer. Mm-hmm. So his voice is very light. He's got incredible breath control from being a great trumpet player. All that use of the diaphragm and everything. And I actually found it really difficult to sing along with him without running out of breath, because he could run 2-3 lines on one breath, just seamlessly. And so they brought me over. I did the audition, did the tape, they liked it, and then they brought me over to Amsterdam for further audition and kind of screen test thing. I spent a day over there, and then it was it was over a month, maybe 2 months before I heard anything again, because they were they had a casting agent in the States as well, so they were basically trying to find Chet Baker in America, which obviously would be the first place you'd look. So they had to wait till they saw the American actors as well. So I was pretty much resigned to the fact, I'm not going to get it. They're looking in America. They had a big casting agent in America. I can't remember her name now, AV, something like that. She cast like the Bourne Ultimatum, all those Bourne movies as well, big stuff. Yeah. So I thought, God, should they have? I'd heard they were looking at Willem Dafoe and all of this. I thought, I haven't a chance here. So then, out of the blue, I think it was only about 4 weeks before they were due to start shooting. I got a call, and it was like, they're offering you the part. Brilliant. So then the panic attack really set in.
Because that's the biggest thing in terms of like you're the star of the movie.
I've never been
biggest part.
Yeah, brilliant. I've never. I'd just been doing lots of little support roles and things before that. Where you're a day player. Stuff like Vikings. You come in and you do a day or two, and then you might be in again a few weeks later or a month later. You come in and you do things. So it's actually quite hard to really get into the zone and to flesh out your character when you're in something so little, So I used to envy the characters that were, that were like the key cast and all that, because you could really delve in and get your teeth into something and expand on it, whatever. But so then it was like this was landed at my feet, and I was determined to do the best job I could possibly do, and so I really sort of started to study Chet, and I just thought about it 24/7. How would I approach this? And
because it's about the last few days of his life,
kind of like the last day of his life, and it's sort of told. It's kind of told in flashback as well. It's revealed in flashback through this detective who's investigating his death, because he was found dead on the pavement in Amsterdam, and he'd fallen or was pushed, or no one's quite sure. They reckon he fell, or maybe he jumped from the Prince Hendrik Hotel. And so in the movie, they use, I suppose, this detective. He's going around to, the jazz clubs and the underworld, interviewing people. He wants to find out what happened to this guy, and so they sort of, these different people he goes and he interviews. They're talking about Chet in kind of flashbacks, like, when is the last time you saw Chet? And he'll say, and then it kind of flashes back. They do these like little turnaround things, and then you're.
So you're playing Chet in the last days, but also you're playing when previous to that, when he's meeting these people and.
Yeah. So, but most of Chet's stuff is kind of like it's opened up through the detective, who's like, there's a doctor that Chet Baker went to that he'd go to him to get some morphine and Palfium and various things that he was on, and and in the movie the detective visits the doctor, and then there's a nice sort of like a cross fade kind of thing, and all of a sudden you're in the 2 days before, or whenever the last time he saw Chet, and you're in that scene, and so it was a real challenge, and I have to say, like, I was really worried going into it. Just kind of there's always those sort of nagging doubts. Am I good enough to do this? Have I bitten off more than I can chew? Was I foolish to go for this? All of those voices in your head that constantly, try to sort of chip away at your confidence. And so, like, I had all of that going on as well, because I hadn't done this before, it's such a big role, and I really didn't know. I was hoping I wasn't going to let anyone down, including myself.
I'm sure you're proud of it, what you did.
I am. I am.
Did you have to sing as well?
I sing in it. I sing live. There's no overdubs or anything.
Okay.
I sing in a couple of different jazz clubs we were in.
You didn't have to play the trumpet.
No, but I had to learn the fingering.
Yeah.
And it was really hard. I had to learn things. So on my days off, I was getting trumpet lessons with this Dutch musician who's a terrific musician. And so we went through all the pieces. He also recorded himself doing them, so I had to try and mimic his breathing. And I had to learn. Thankfully, there's only 3 valves on a trumpet. But I came up with a system of charts. I put these, just like 3 circles, and I'd colour in the ones that were, they had to press. And the awkward thing was, like, Chet played with his eyes closed. So I had to sort of obviously play with my eyes closed, but I had to squint through little slits in my eyes and place these pieces of paper around the set where I could see them and where the camera wouldn't. And I had to follow the fingering, but then the singing is completely live.
Brilliant. No, I'm really looking forward to it. When is it coming out in Ireland, do you know? I
don't know. I think it's been entered into the... I hope they have entered it into the Dublin Film Festival. So, if it has, then if the selectors like it, hopefully it'll get screened. I know they've entered it into a bunch of festivals. The first festival is the Dutch Film Festival on the 29th of September in Utrecht. So that's the premiere.
Well, best of luck. We look forward to it. See, the second last song, and then we'll let you go, is the Joy Division, Atmosphere.
Atmosphere, yeah.
It's just brilliant.
It's incredible.
Yeah, no, Joy Division.
Incredible.
Just, speaking of biopic, that's a great movie about Joy Division.
It was a Control.
Control.
It's terrific. It's really good. The actor who plays Ian Curtis is brilliant.
Ian Curtis, that's the name.
Yeah. Joy Division. When I was, I suppose I was about 19 or so when I came across them first, and it was through a friend. I joined a band when I was in college in Galway. I joined a band called New Testament, a band that was put together by a friend of mine called Eamon Dowd, and so Eamon was really influenced by Joy Division and Echo and the Bunnymen and The Clash and bands like that. So we modelled ourselves a bit on those bands. Even the way we dressed, we were like buying second-hand suits and dyeing our hair black and wearing mascara and all that kind of thing, and being like dark, moody young men. But it was great. And so Joy Division, they would have been one of the bands that we all read magazines like NME at the time and the Face magazine and all this kind of stuff, although the Face magazine came later, I think. But and then actually New Testament, we got to support New Order.
Oh wow.
In UCG in Galway. I suppose, what year would it have been? Somebody found a poster of it and put it on Facebook recently.
Brilliant.
It was probably around 1982 or something.
Wow.
Yeah, we supported New Order, and for us, I remember we were sitting in the dressing room with them. We were just like totally in awe, just there looking at Peter Hook and Bernard Sumner and the drummer was named Stephen something, and we just couldn't believe we were sitting, in a room with our idols. These guys had been in Joy Division. It was like such a buzz.
Brilliant.
But it's a really sad. I suppose the story of Ian Curtis is really sad, and the talent that he had, and also such bad epilepsy, really, that he was just so frightened going on stage as well, whether it's going to, because he was embarrassed by it if he had a fit, and the fits happened quite regularly apparently, and but the talent there, and I've read a bit about him, and I was fascinated to learn that one of his favourite bands was The Doors, and he loved Jim Morrison, and you can really hear how his singing was influenced by Jim Morrison. He sang in low. He sang in a lower octave, almost sort of too low for his voice, but he sang down in the octave so that when it came to a bit where you had to kind of like really go for it, you could go up the octave, So you can really hear that, like that sort of that vocal style, going for that deep, poetic sort of vocal style. But I'd never have thought that really, you know, that they would have been into. But they were into all kinds of stuff at the time.
Wrap it up and it's getting late and I'm sure you want to get back. But the last thing I want to ask you, you have loads of stories from, like we all do, right? We all have loads of stories, but you have a great way of telling them as well. And as I heard when you were talking to Jarlath and through your songs, have you considered writing, what is your biography, or writing a novel, or writing or are you doing any of that?
No, I do think about it.
Because it would definitely be a way to get your pen and paper out again, and without getting Because there are, like, I heard some of the stories you were talking to Jarlath about. I mean, Ennis Diamond and whatever it was in the 70s. There's got to be plenty of stories there. To tell, you know, and there's stories that need to be told, I think, because what we're talking about, we've gone quite bland in a lot of ways. You know, with social media where.
I know,
we just don't do enough. And the other thing that was interested in is the fact you were talking about your granny, your aunt, living with everybody, and that's the way I grew up in Italy. There was always too many people in the house. Well, at the time, it felt like too many people, but you were actually talking to somebody who was 2 generations ahead of you, and it was great. Looking back, it was like, oh, actually, that's how you learned, because. Whether you cared or not, there was wisdom coming through.
Yeah, and
now it's
Ennis Diamond was like that as well. When we moved down there, you know, if there was something on in the town, if there was like a gig or a movie, I remember when they showed Jaws in the old town hall in Ennis Diamond. The building's gone since. It was an old wooden building, and somebody brought a projector in and showed Jaws. Like the whole town and people that came from outlying areas were stuffed into this hall to watch Jaws. I will never forget it. There was like old men in flat caps and, you know, the local undertaker and the local supermarket owner and the local priest. Everybody there watching Jaws. And then when some of those scary bits were happening in the film, there were people sort of like hanging kind of halfway between sort of getting out of their seat and hiding their, you know. And what was kind of cool that you don't know at the time because you're a kid and you don't really understand is that you had all ages, all types of people, you know, all in the one place. And I suppose a small town Ireland is a little bit of a microcosm of a bigger city. You have all the different sort of levels and social strata and all of that. And when I look back on it now, you know, it was difficult when we moved down there because I just started secondary school in Dublin. At this point we were living in Rathfarnham in a lovely house, and I didn't want to leave. But in retrospect, when I look back at it now, I think it gave me so much. It added so much to my life in terms of experience and the kind of person I've become. You know, I would feel equally comfortable talking to anybody. You know, in the west of Ireland, I could talk to anybody about anything and feel totally and hopefully make them feel comfortable as well. And I could talk to, you know, anyone, and that's from, you know, the complete opposite.
Absolutely. You know, I come from Italy and I grew up in a small village outside Rome, and you know Italy well, and that village scene is still there in some parts where everybody sits around the piazza and they're all having a chat, and I that's one of the reasons I started this whole little idea, this project, is I really do believe we're missing out on conversation. What we're doing now, and I'm recording for the simple reason that I want people to know that there's a big wide world out there, and it's made out of all of us, and all of us are something. and whatever happened in East Ham in the 70s, that little story of the shark, of watching Jaws, it's great, and I hope that my kids will experience that somehow, somewhere. But at the moment, it's kind of flat line. It's all we all watch something on our own device in 3 different rooms or 4 different rooms, and it's like, really? And I mean, the heart of the family, it's in the sitting room where the fire is, where everybody should be sitting around, and it was the only place where there was heat.
Yeah,
and that's so all of that is.
But even like I remember, like in the because it was it was a small town and no one was going to get lost or anything. You go so like there was the pool hall, and there was the place obviously your parents didn't want you hanging out in, but that's an experience you have to have as well. Hanging out there and looking at the girls playing pool and pinball, and you've got the tough lads, you've got the lads acting tough, you've got all of that. It's all sort of like part of growing up. And these days now, I mean, what David Kitt said recently as well, in a Facebook post that he put up about, not being able to afford to live in Dublin anymore. I think all of that as well needs to be taken into account because, like Dublin was always like, a city with a bit of a centre in it. Even when I was a kid, like I'd go into town and, like I used to go into town when I was only 14 years old. With friends and kind of hang out. And I know some people still do that. A lot of parents wouldn't let their kids go in, But also there's the whole thing of just the pub as well, or the cafe, which is, a much more popular thing now, which is great. But I think when a city starts to become sort of kind of homogenized, and also you kind of feel that the city is not for the people who live in it anymore. It's for the people the transient workers, for the Google employees, for when the people who are actually from here, or the Irish people, or even people from other countries who are living here. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Ireland for the Irish or anything like that. What I'm saying is that when people, if it comes to a point where in order to live in Dublin that you have to earn above a certain salary, that's wrong. And that's one thing that I'm very unhappy about the present administration, the present government. They don't see it like that at all. I think a city needs to have all types of people in it. Totally. It needs to have that mixture of artists, every class of people. Absolutely. And it needs that. Just like in good small towns, Ennisdiamond now the town is really booming. It's at a huge turnaround, and it's a real success story for a town that was really down on its luck through the 80s and also through the recent recession as well. But it's coming around, and most of that is happening because there's a lot of artistic people in the area. There are people doing artisan foods. They're thinking outside the box, and it's coming from them. It's not coming from big industry. It's not coming from...
Perhaps it's the case that particular artisan food gets the premises at the right price, or the local guy, the landlord has the money, allows him or her to have that shop to create the artisan food. And all of a sudden, it's become way prohibitive in Dublin.
Whereas there's so many people now in Dublin that try to start businesses, they can't afford the rates. Yeah. They were friends of mine, you probably know them as well, in the rag trade. Yeah. They had a couple of great shops, George's Street Arcade, Wicklow Street. Then, I remember the day that Zara and H&M and all opened there beside the Gaiety Theatre. This massive place opens, and that's expanding again as well. But they've knocked down the Steps of Rome, all of that stuff on Chatham Street now. They're building yet another mall of generic shops that you can get in every other city in Europe. But the Irish guys, these guys, you know them as well. They opened their place, and I remember one day Dave said to me, he said, I feel sick. He said that they get maybe the first couple of years, rent free. Whatever it is, they get a few years rent free. They get all of these, help to sort of, the key tenants in this major new development. They get all those breaks to get one of these massive big chains in there. Yeah. What is the little... Yeah. What does the little Irish business get? You know what I mean? They're gone now. They couldn't compete. They're gone.
Right, and unfortunately, it's happening every day.
And they were there for years. They put so many students, all kinds of people working in that shop, in their shops, And that's what I think, that's where, when it comes to voting, that's why I think it's really important to talk to your children about these things.
Sure.
Because it's like, you can change it. If enough of you agree that this isn't right and you want to safeguard your town or your city in the future and make it somewhere that you can afford to live, all people,
Sure.
you know, Dublin should not be exclusively for the ones on, you know, big salaries to be able to afford to live in it. It shouldn't be like that.
I agree. I totally agree.
And the same goes for Galway, Cork, Limerick, wherever.
No, and unfortunately it's spreading across the country, unfortunately. Steve, I always ask everybody to leave us with a couple of words of wisdom, and you're a wise old man, so I'm sure you have a couple of good ones. Give us a couple of words of wisdom for any of the listeners.
Keep kicking against the pricks.
I like it. That's good enough. And we're going to leave it with break on through to the other side by the doors.
Very apt.
Steve Ball, thanks a million for your time.
Thanks, Andrea.
You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, break on through to the other side, yeah. We chased our pleasures here, dug our treasures there, can't stay